Welcome to Directionally Correct, a Feelings podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Paul Sackett, professor at University of Minnesota.
Thanks to our sponsors, Orgnostic. Fast track the insights behind your people data using Orgnostic by connecting all your HR data in one people analytics platform. Quickly uncover the insights you need to measure the success of your people initiatives. Orgnostic is the most innovative people analytics, generative AI, data orchestration, and employee listening tool on the market. To learn more, book a demo at orgnostic.com/directionally correct. I'm curious, this is podcast worthy. Did you see the new AI regulations that came out from that executive order?
No, what is it?
You haven't?
No.
It's a big deal. So President Biden put out, I believe it's over 100-page document. And usually, just for context, like an executive order is usually like a page. It's not even like a long one. Like, and they use the big swoopy signatures at the bottom. But it's over 100-page document on guidelines for how to use AI. And it is tough.
Yes.
It's tough. And I don't know. It's kind of like written in a way, and I'm trying to be charitable about this because I think I just fundamentally disagree with it. It's written in a way where I think no matter what you do, you're out of compliance. And so then if you know everybody is out of compliance, then it just comes down to selective like prosecution of people. And
yeah.
that to me just, and so I could kind of see these sometimes through like cynical takes of like, how can you tax big tech companies? Well, just put a regulation in place that they can't abide by, and then just hit them with whopping fines, and then that turns into a de facto tax.
De facto tax puts them over a barrel too. Like these people
Yeah.
don't know how to use Facebook. I'm not talking like Facebook AI. I'm talking Facebook. They don't understand it yet. Writing laws about it, or executive orders, as it were. I wonder if he used Chat GPT to write the executive order.
Maybe. Now that would be a really ironic statement if you found out there were hallucinations in the executive order that was written by ChatGPT to govern ChatGPT.
Well, even like pre-AI, we'll call it 5-10 years ago, like you'd get these stories of like, well, the party that I dislike, whatever the other party is, they produced a 5,000-page document and we had a vote on it in 2 hours. It's like,
Yeah, no
how do
kidding.
you, I can't produce an 18-page book chapter right now. Like, how do you produce this much content that quickly?
I do not know. I will say this. I'm curious 'cause I don't have a good definition. Do you have a good definition of what constitutes AI? Because it
I
seems like
mean,
it's just a catch-all phrase now.
at its core, just automated decision making. I mean, and that's a lot of things, right?
But what
That's
if it's
everything.
not even making a decision? What if it's just generating things?
I mean, I think that is in a decision itself. Like
I
generative
guess.
AI is like you're making decisions on the syntax of, and this is probably what you're talking about, like where they have tech companies over a barrel. It's like, well, your algorithm produced a sentence that had this sort of structure.
Yeah.
It had to decide on that structure. I don't know. I
I mean,
don't know. I'm off the
like, can I
rails.
be facetious here for a second? And this is not a reflection on you. Do you remember learning about like IPO framework, the input process output framework in grad school?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I just feel like anything that fits the input process output is now AI. It has an output, it's therefore making a decision. It's like it had some kind of calculation to come to that conclusion. Like, is all software AI? Is every line of code that's ever been written AI? Like, I don't know.
Well, what I think is fascinating is say like although stock documents that'll come out and be like Microsoft was up 3.2% today on heavy
Mhm.
trading on the floor and like da 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 da. Almost all of that is just automatically generated on the fly.
Yeah.
It's like a Mad Libs. It's like a template, and they just
Well, they better
fill it
submit
in.
their code to the government or they're going to be shut down.
Man,
It's just
uh,
wild.
I got invited to a gala last night, totally switching gears.
Yeah.
It was wild. It was like fancy dinner party, as you could imagine, like sitting around, like drinking wine and eating cocktails of people walking around handing shit out.
So a gala, does that mean there was like violins playing and everybody was in a tuxedo, or what kind of gala is this?
Yes, yeah, that's pretty good description. There was no one actually playing a violin or a cello in the corner, but there definitely could have been. I
Yeah.
mean, they had like the whole bit, and like there was various levels of dress. Some people in suits. I rocked like psyop nice for me. You know what I mean?
IOP, nice for you. Full elbow pads and all.
No, no elbow pads, but not even a suit jacket. I mean that's what psyop nice rises for me.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, hey Paul, it's good to see you.
Good morning.
What's that? What's psyop like for you, Paul? I mean, like you're IO royalty. You must walk around like a king.
Oh, indeed I do, of course. No, I mean, geez. I mean, SciOp's been a big part of my life forever and ever. Um, it just goes back a long time. So it's great fun to watch the changes. I mean, I remember, being involved on their executive committee when we were deciding, would it make sense for us to have our own conference back in the day where, it was just APA
Uh-huh.
and we were Division 14 and they gave us 40 hours of programming time spread across 5 days. So you had 8 hours a day. So you could have one session at a time over those 5 days. So do you think anybody would come if we had our own meeting? And wow, first one, Chicago, which is where we're going back this year, which is sort of fun, back to the scene of the crime. And it's just blossomed. It's just amazing. So
They say serial killers always go back to the scene of the crime.
you got it.
So yeah. Well, I mean, it must never get old having the graduate students fawn over you. I suspect that I don't know if this happens to you, but do people quote research that you did like 30 years ago back to you, expecting you to remember all the details of what you wrote?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So they do that, but more often it's more a question about it, you
Yeah.
know, on page 47 of your 1986 paper, you said, and why did you do this? And why, I said that, it's very strange. It is odd. I mean, it is a weird thing. I think back to as a grad student going to my first conference, which was APA, and so a handful of us, here we're students and we're terrified. Here's all the big people, and you wander around. You're staring at everybody's name tag. You're trying to find, recognize, and then you go, oh my God, that's Gary Latham.
Yeah.
Paul, go talk to him. No, Phil, you go talk to him. What am I going to say? I read your paper and I liked it. I mean, we thought we'd be really stupid. Do we dare? Do we dare approach people? And um, so yeah, so I don't know. With my students, I now sort of take a student in hand and approach a colleague, a friend, and say, hey, let me introduce my student so and so, and so give them that chance to say hi and say people are always happy that other people see their stuff and that they're known and recognized. But it is sort of weird. I mean, I get this odd thing at PSYOP of, oh, can I take a selfie with you kind of, and I'm going, it's this peculiar,
When did that start?
for 2 days a year, you're a sort of celebrity, as it were, which is odd. But I just smile and say, okay, I'm glad it's being read. Better to be that than to be ignored. So.
I think we all need selfies at psyop this year, right? We got to all get together.
Yeah.
That would be fun. Do
It
it
would
like
be
a
fun.
directionally correct get together, take a bunch of selfies. That would be really fun.
It's also reassuring to hear that like you were once a starstruck, young researcher, and now you've become that star that people seek out.
Oh God. No, I mean, I think back with such fond memories of going to that first conference. We're students. There's no money. There's no travel support.
Yeah.
The conference. I'm at Ohio State, and so we're in Ohio, and the conference is in D.C. And we decide that we're going to get in a Volkswagen van and drive there. And we don't have any money, but we find that on the interstate circling DC on the outskirts, there's something called the Cherry Hill Campground, So we went and pitched a tent and got up in the morning, put on our terrible polyester suits and drove into downtown DC and went to the conference, and came back in the evening and over our cook stove, made something to eat. And yeah, this was conference on the cheap. I think about the fact my university is blessed. We have a alum who made a donation to provide a travel fund to help students go to the conference. And I just think about, being able to say to each of them, here's your, I don't know what it is, $600, $800. I mean, a decent, cover an airfare and some hotel. And we hope that all our students will go every year. And I'm thinking back to, Cherry Hill Campground. Yeah.
I love walking through the conference hotel and seeing like a hotel room will open up and you see like clearly 8 students are sleeping in this room meant for 2 people.
Absolutely.
That's the best. I remember those days. Those were fun. I mean, it's a lot of like, I know doing it on the cheap is tough, but it's a whole lot of fun going as a grad student too.
A wise man once said, "There's 2 type of people that go to PsyOp. Those who wear suits and those who don't. And the people that wear suits are either high rollers or low rollers. Which are you? Which are you?" I was like, "Okay, I'm never gonna wear a suit again."
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm still a guy who sort of half dresses up for PSYOP. The ties were abandoned years ago, but I'm still a blue blazer and a shirt, something like that.
I wonder if the pandemic is going to hasten like a more relaxed sort of style at PsyOp. I'm starting to see some jeans creep in.
I think it's really there. It's such a big change. Well, the whole world's changed.
Oh
There's still going to be some low rollers dressing to impress, though. That's
Yeah,
always going to be there.
yeah.
People
Yeah.
need jobs after all, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yep.
that's not going away.
Yeah.
Do you have like a favorite memory or like a funny experience that happened over the years?
I mean, a PSYOP related
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, like
Oh yeah, sure. Here's here's one that comes to mind. This is really stupid. The story is sort of a weird and long setup, but it's a good story. So I'll tell it. When I was a student at Ohio State, we had a exam that we were all given at the end of the second year. That's sort of a how are you doing? Are you on track? Do you get to keep on going? And the faculty, I thought, were particularly mean and cruel. One part of the exam took the following format. Here's some names. Tell me the importance to the field of IO psychology of each of these people. And here's, name. And the faculty, just to mess with our heads, put in a non-existent person. They came up with the name Mitchell Frobinger. And so I'm reading this list of, here's all these famous psychologists. I'm carrying on, yes. Vroom's expectancy theory, Gary Latham's goal setting, and I hit Mitchell Frobinger, and I go, and of course I draw a blank. But anyway, so one, we thought that was mean, but then we dreamed up a history for Mitchell Frobinger. We said, there's a phenomenon that I think all of us exist. You're trying to write something scholarly and you make some pronouncement and you say, this needs a citation. I can't just say this. I have to point and say somebody said it. And so we decided whenever you're in that point of saying, I don't know what the citation would be, but it needs one, we said you're going to cite Frobinger. So you make up and put Mitchell Frobinger in. But anyway, so that was fun. And I, just to amuse myself for many, many years, I told my students that any paper they turned into me had to include a made-up Frobinger citation. And in the reference section, they needed to actually, make up a, article title, this, that, and the other. Yeah, and I had one student who did it for his dissertation and forgot to remove it. So it's
nice.
all eternity. And it's really cool. So you look to the reference section, and here's Frobinger and Mitchell.
I was wondering where the replication crisis started. Now we know where.
Yeah.
All these fake citations.
Yeah. So he had a faculty member got his schedule confused and didn't show up for a dissertation proposal meeting. And so in honor of that fact, my student in the reference section, if you find Frobinger, MQ, with the article titled, "Does Lee Know What Day It Is?" published in the Journal of Forgotten Appointments. Um, and I thought that was fun and clever, and it was a nice little dig at the faculty member. But anyway, that's enshrined forever. But then my students pulled one on me. They went to PSYOP. They had some connection with whoever was staffing the booth that made name tags, and they recruited a grad student from I don't know where, some other university. They had a name tag made reading Mitchell Frobinger, and they had this guy put it on, and Paul, look, we found the real Mitchell Frobinger. And so they pranked me good with that one. It was a
Well, I mean, like, obviously, you kind of blew up the Schmidt and Hunter article recently in the past couple of years, but like,
yeah,
how do you feel about these sort of practices that organizations will do? It's like uh, an impossible task, a Mitchell Frobringer sort of task, where like they put candidates through a series of tasks that are impossible to.
yeah. I'm not fond of that. I mean, I think well, we can learn an awful lot of good stuff about people doing it the right way, and
Yeah.
all these, I keep a collection of all these odd suggestions. When the interview's finished, escort the candidate out of the building, walk with them back to their car, and then look inside and see how neat and tidy their car is, and if there are Burger King wrappers and this, that, and the other all over the car, that tells you, cut it out. I mean, it's everyone's. Oh, here's my neat trick. The secret to, the secret to interviewing, the secret to this. So no, yeah. I mean, yeah. There's tons. If you could be an animal, which one would it be? All that silliness.
Was any of that in the revision of Schmidt and Hunter?
Of course, no.
So following people with the car validity coefficient.
Yeah. So yeah, of course, there's no validity stuff for any of that. So.
Well, where did that start? I mean, Schmidt and Hunter article since '98 has been one of the hallmarks of IO.
Sure.
How did you get on this path of replicating it or trying the new adjustments, etc.?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'd been honest answer obsessing about it for years because there was stuff in it that just didn't seem right.
Mm.
I mean, I'm at a university, but I certainly more than keep my hand in the practice world. I have an active consulting practice, work with lots of people, and all of my practitioner colleagues and friends complain and say, how come we don't get numbers like the numbers in that review? And I've had lots of people say, what's wrong with me? Why am I, am I that feeble and infirm as an IO psychologist that I can't get the numbers that are there? And the thing that is factual, and I've been aware of it for a long time, and it was always a little complaint of mine. The famous Schmidt and Hunter table. I mean, they simply compiled other information. They said, we're going to pull the meta-analyses of everything under the sun and just put them in one place. So they're just gathering information that other people have done and just giving us a sort of a rank order table. But the correlations in that famous table are all, quote, corrected. Right. And so now we get geeky here. I mean, you compute a correlation. This is what you observe. And then commonly you make these corrections, and conceptually a correction makes sense. The question you want to answer is, how well does this work in my applicant pool? My applicant pool has a range of candidates from here to here, but the group of people you hire, if the group of people you hire are from here to here, I mean, we've long known, and it's part of everybody's graduate training, that's range restriction, and range restriction reduces validity, and so you have to correct for it. And so they report these corrected validities, and the corrected validities are like double what the observed are, meaning that correction makes all the difference in the world, which means it better be right. And that just led me to take a close look at the correction process. And I went down the wrong path for a long time, thinking there must be something wrong with the correction formulas. And I took them apart and messed with them, and no, there's nothing wrong with the correction formulas. They are correct. And it turns out to be a conceptual problem. And it's so simple that, once I explain it to people, everybody goes, how did we not see it? And the basic notion is we got two kinds of validity study designs, predictive and concurrent. The shortcut, y'all want to try out a new test, give it to current employees, computer correlation, I can do it in a day. It's quick and easy. And the catch is, because you're giving it to current employees, it means the test wasn't used to screen them, so you haven't got a real reduced pool. You give it to applicants, you use it to hire, it's easy to get a large range restriction. So the punchline is, there's big range restriction corrections are commonly needed for predictive studies, and only in really rare circumstances might they be needed in concurrent studies. But the way meta-analysis works is Schmidt and Hunter made up a shortcut, and conceptually it was good. It's clever. They gave a clever. Ideally, you can take every individual study, correct that study for the amount of range restriction in that study, and average them up, and that's your meta-analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But oh my goodness, you only get these estimates of how much range restriction is there for a handful of studies. And so the standard procedure that the field's done is, for all the studies that show you that, you compute the average amount of range restriction and apply that average amount to all the studies in your whole database.
Oh, wow.
It makes the assumption that the degree of range restriction in the studies that tell you about it matches what you get overall. And the key brainstorm is this notion that, well, gee, concurrent studies don't have much range restriction. Predictive studies do. Where do you get estimates of range restriction? From predictive studies only, because you need the standard deviation in the applicant pool and in the group you hire in order to, it's the ratio of those two things that's the correction factor.
Can I ask a clarifying question? On concurrent studies only, is it just much smaller corrections for range restriction, or no correction at all? Or is there an either or?
It's not an either or. It's the way if you work the math, you find it's very, very hard to get substantial range restriction in a concurrent study, because the thing you're studying wasn't actually used to screen people. So if there's restriction, its fancy term is it's indirect, right? It's due to the thing you're trying out. If it happens to be correlated with the thing that you actually use to select people, then that produces some restriction. And so the only way to get big range restriction in a concurrent study, and it is possible. There was a good example that a practitioner colleague provided to me, would be the following. Imagine that they were screened using a cognitive ability test when they were hired, and the firm in question has decided to switch vendors, and they're going to hire a different vendor and use that firm's cognitive ability test instead. And just to be sure that it works, they do a quick concurrent validity study on the new vendor's cognitive test. That would be an instance where it's a concurrent, but the thing you're trying out correlates really highly with the way they were originally selected, and so you can get range restriction in a concurrent study. So it's not a you can or you can't. It's possible, but only in rare circumstances would you get a lot of restriction. So, but the information needed for correction only can be found in the predictive study, because you need the ratio, you need the information about the full applicant, how your your new predictor fares in the applicant pool, and you don't have that when you're just quickly trying it out on current employees. So one, you find, oh my goodness, this applying the same correction to all studies is doesn't make sense.
Well, can I make a practical comment about that? And you mentioned earlier your colleagues, yourself when you practiced via your consulting firm, but also your other colleagues that were out and practicing in the real world weren't finding the coefficient sizes that Schmidt and Hunter would indicate. And perhaps one of the reasons is, at least in my experience, most studies in the real world are concurrent studies. Predictive studies are much, much more rare.
That's the thing that I was about to say when you stepped in. What I discovered, and I didn't know this until a year ago. Since I'm compiling all the meta-analyses of all the predictors, so across all of those, I compiled and discovered exactly what you said. On average, in our field, 80% of studies are concurrent. Mm-hmm. It's quicker and easier, and it makes it. That's not a flaw. It makes sense as a way of getting information in an efficient way. But so this notion that says, hey, the correction factor that should only be applied to 20% of the studies that are predictive is applied to all studies, including the 80% concurrent. And that's how I reached this conclusion. That's how we overestimated for all these years. And you explain that to people, and they go, well, yeah, of course. How did we not see it? And I go, yeah, I didn't see it. Nobody. I mean, we all it's one of those things that once it's explained, people go, geez, yes, I get it. So people generally, I mean, there's a handful of holdouts. There's a handful of people who are, nope, the old way, the old values, we must defend them. But I mean, I've given, dozens and dozens of talks about this to audiences all over the world, and the general reaction is, one, we grasp what you're arguing, it makes perfect sense, and here's this new world. Yeah, so I see you put up this nice. I apologize, I'm blanking on the name of the fellow who created this. I thought it was very nice, and I admire his work. So apologies for not being able. You remind me who.
Absolutely. So this is a repost from AJ Thurston, who I
Right.
believe
Thank you.
is
Yeah.
someone else
I think
created it.
Ludic actually created it, because I was going to cover this later on,
Okay.
but it's good that you pulled it up. I think it leads to a really just like basic question, which is, why did some of the coefficients go down and others go up?
Okay. Okay.
Right.
So I mean, on average, so the basic message is, due to this thing we've just been talking about, on average, we've been overcorrecting for a long time. And so you would expect that many would go down, but the amount they go down just depends. I mean, how restricted were the samples, this, that, and the other. But what I did, my team, I mean, I put together it was a great working group. Well, I need to give them credit because they deserve it. I mean, my frequent collaborator, the Belgian psychologist Philip Levens, two former students of mine, Chris Berry at Indiana and Charlene Zhang at Amazon. So the four of us spent the COVID period trying to compile all of this, going back and revisiting all of the predictors and trying to sort of redo Schmidt and Hunter. But so there's two things we did. One, rethinking the correction factor, but second, since it's 25 years that have passed, in many cases, there's lots of new data. So if there, here's an updated meta-analysis with twice as many studies. So the combination of reworking the corrections and looking at it all leads to this. You'll see mostly up and mostly down. The one very vivid up that you'll see on the left, it starts as the very lowest, interests. And so our IO field has pretty much dismissed vocational interests as a predictor based on, this. Oh, look at this.
Perhaps we shouldn't have dismissed it.
Right. And it turns out that the problem there, this is another conceptual problem. I mean, the value in Schmidt and Hunter is not Schmidt and Hunter's fault. They just pulled what's in the literature. But people were not thinking clearly about interests. It doesn't make any sense to say, take an interest model, RIASEC. Let's pick one. Let's take investigative interests. That's one of the 6 fields. What the data going into Schmidt and Hunter says, let's get people's score on the investigative interest scale and correlate it with job performance for all people in all jobs. And it comes out on average really low.
Yeah, makes sense.
But the question that you want to ask is, how well does your score on the investigative interest scale predict performance in jobs that we'd categorize as investigative jobs? It's got to be this interest job match. So by just saying, do realistic interests correlate with performance across the board? No, they don't. They should only correlate with performance in realistic jobs.
I think you could say the same thing about cognitive ability too. Like, it's one of the best measured constructs we have in IO psychology, and applies very broadly across the different aspects of our lives. But but when you measure more narrow sort of job interests or jobs in themselves, not necessarily as powerful of a predictor as say like structured interviews or job knowledge tests.
Yeah. Yeah. So this just nicely, I mean, in our article, we've got it. I mean, it's in the format that we have to have for putting it in the scientific journal. First, here's all the numbers in a table, and we've got a graph that maybe you'll show later that I think is clever and interesting. But this is a very very nice way to show it too. So you very vividly see. I mean, so one on average things go down, but it's sort of there's this restructuring of what rises to the top. The old message was cognitive ability is really high, and work samples work really well as well. So cognitive ability shows this big drop. Employment interviews emerge at the top of the heap.
Well, Paul, can I do a quick PSA here for because we actually have a pretty big contingent of folks that are not IO psychologists that listen to this podcast. I
Yeah,
want to tee up why this is important. For IO psychologists, the Schmidt and Hunter 1998 article might be one of the most cited research articles we ever had. And it kind of told us the state of the science on what it takes to select candidates effectively. And one of the top areas that consistently came around was cognitive ability.
yeah,
And so there's been this ongoing debate for a really long time about like the diversity validity trade-off and what's going on there. And come to find out via your, I would actually call it a series of research, even though the biggest article is the one that's being shared on the screen right now, is perhaps a lot of the things that we knew as like solid science have actually are decreased a lot. And then things like interests actually matter more than we thought they might. And
mhm,
that's like a bombshell for our field. Like it's a huge deal that had been 30 years in the making. And so getting somebody like you on here to talk about it kind of in plain English is super helpful for our field. But I do want to dig in, and I know Scott kind of talked about this briefly about cognitive ability. I always saw, and I would love for you to correct me if this is the wrong way of thinking about it. I always saw cognitive ability as kind of a threshold barrier. It was like, for most thinking jobs you probably need a certain level of cognitive ability, but over that level you other factors probably came into play for making a bigger effect on your ability to do the job.
yeah.
Would you say that the corrections that you made validate something like that, invalidate it, or am I just off in left field?
No, I mean I understand. I mean, what you say is a common belief, and I
Hmm.
will strongly assert that that common belief is incorrect.
Okay.
And I've got good data on it, and that's published.
Sure.
Um, so, yeah, I mean, Malcolm Gladwell is probably the key, the key figure behind this threshold. Once you reach a certain point, it doesn't make any difference to have more. And no, it was a student of mine did his dissertation on this. We compiled data from all over, from the world of work, from the world of education, higher ed, predicting educational performance, military, predicting military performance. And what we find is essentially the relationship is linear. More is better throughout the whole range. This idea of there's a point above which more doesn't help, that doesn't work. Now, the idea that more is better across the range is true, but that doesn't have anything to do with the also true fact that any one thing, cognitive ability, only only gets you part of the way there. If I know your cognitive ability score, that helps me a lot. I start to get a sense of a likely range in which your performance might fall. But I got to know all kinds of other things. If I learn that you're really smart, and you're also conscientious as hell, I'm starting to get more confident that I'm going to get a lot of stuff out of you. If I learn you're really smart and really low on conscientiousness and on attention to detail and on persistence. Oh my goodness, I start to think different. So yeah, so the fact that more is always better is true, and that in any circumstance there's multiple determinants of performance. I can't imagine any system where I would advocate a selection system where we measure one and only one thing. And I think that's what our field is. This the Schmidt Hunter table and my replication of it talks about these things one at a time. But in follow up stuff that we've been doing since then, we are saying, now what happens when we combine them, when we put two or three or four different measures together in building a selection system? What do we achieve both in terms of performance and, as you mentioned, diversity? So jumping the gun, so this paper just talks about one at a time. How does that work? And there's two follow-up papers that I think are, how do I say it, as incendiary or
Uh-oh.
game
Uh-oh.
yeah, I just saw it. Here we go, new insights into the validity diversity dilemma. So here's a paper. It's still floating around in the review process. I was desperately hoping that it would be, that I could say to you today, yeah, it's in. But yeah, last week the editor says, I still want to see some more tweaks, so we'll tweak it a little more, but we'll get there. But it's on its way. I'm confident it'll get there. So in our field, oh dear, I think something's missing here. Oh well, but there's a well-known piece in our literature, and it's Bob Cohen-Roth put it together, which is they oh here we go. There's the part I'm missing. So they had 6 predictors, and so these are 6 widely used things in our field, and they picked those only because you need a lot of information. You need validity for each one, and you need the intercorrelations among all of them. And if you know that, you can do some fancy math and say what level of validity would you get and what level of, let's call it, adverse impact would you get if you use different combinations. What if I used cognitive ability and conscientiousness together? What if I added a third, add situational judgment to those? So
these are the Pareto optimal sort of selection measures,
yeah,
right?
we get into that. And I think so that's sort of the setup. We updated all those values based on the new way of thinking that I've just been talking about. And here's a punchline that I think is, to me, truly spectacular. With the old values, if you built a composite that didn't have cognitive ability in it, you lost 10 to 20 validity points. With the new updated values, composites with and without cognitive ability on average are equal. This whole notion of, we said that, the issue was, Schmidt and Hunter said, gee, cognitive ability should be the centerpiece of all selection systems because of its special status. And at the same time, cognitive ability at the time we believed was the best predictor we've got. And at the same time, it has the more adverse impact than anything else we've been able to design. So we've got one thing we want and one thing we don't want. And that's why we always talked about this validity diversity dilemma. People, oh my goodness, I need to use this because I want good performance, but I don't like the impact consequence. And we've spent decades trying out different ideas for how can we work around that problem. What if I give less weight to cognitive ability than the data say it deserves in order to help with diversity? And we formalized that with this Pareto optimality stuff, which I don't think we're going to talk about today. That's very, very geeky. But the message really is, with these new values, what we saw as how do we do it? How do we get good validity without giving high weight to this high impact predictor of ability? No, you can get good prediction without using predictors that will bring in a lot of adverse impact. So this one, like I say, this is still in the review process. I've been on the circuit, preaching this to every audience I can get. It was just at PsyOps. We just had the LEC, that leading edge consortium, was about assessing.
Yeah, we talked to Charles Handler while he was there.
Okay. But anyway, so I talked about this work here, and just look at this. It's this thing we thought was an unsolvable dilemma for decades is just sort of going to go away. So I think that's nice.
You can get as geeky as you want, really. We're here for it.
Can I tell a random story really quick?
Sure.
It's somewhat related. You mentioned the Bob Roth classic matrix. And when I left graduate school and I moved to Raleigh, my cousin introduced me to a few people he knew in Raleigh. And I got together with them, and one of their last names was Bobco. And I was like, oh, I used to cite this Bob Cohen Roth matrix. and it was like, "Oh, that's my dad."
That's it, right. I was gonna say that was, yeah,
And then there was another famer that was Bobco, and Bobco, he's like, "Oh, I've actually published in your field."
exactly.
Given this guy's like a physicist or something, like he's not even a social scientist,
Yeah,
and he's published in one of our, like, our top journals. I was like, "Oh my god, I've known who you were for years."
right, right, exactly.
It
Yeah.
was
So
very
yeah,
strange.
You
Uh,
mentioned Probringer, right?
Frobinger. But anyway, so so as I said, the second paper we've just been talking about, this notion of, hey, this validity diversity trade-off isn't as imposing as we thought it was. And then the third, and this one,
is that one of the ones you sent me as well?
yeah. The third talks about, I mean, as you rightly note, cognitivity. I mean, we've had this speech about, hey, it's the, here we go, show that look at this. So I list all the authors here. This is from the SciAp LEC slide deck. Since it's a bunch of my grad students and I need to let them get their names, up here. So none of this Sackett at
Gotta get
all
those
nonsense.
professor jobs.
They all get that. But anyway, as we're updating Schmidt and Hunter, I say, you know what? Everything the field believes we know about cognitivity comes from the data is more than 50 years old. I don't mean on average. I mean the single most recent study in our cognitivity database is 50 years old. The average age is 75 years. We are relying on really, really old
Mhm.
data. And I said, that can't be right. And so I said, well, we really should. I mean, even though we say it's an answered question and we already know the answer. So we said, let's just take a look, as you see here, 21st century data. So we all went to work and hunted up and managed to find 153 new validity samples, which I thought was pretty cool. And it's the published literature. And we tried sending it to a journal. The journal said, this is interesting, but, I wonder if you'd get something different. Do consultants get different answers? Are they more skilled at getting, a lot of the academic stuff might be students doing dissertations, maybe they're novices. So okay, so we went back out and I reached out to everybody in SciOp who said they had an interest in personnel selection in the SciOp directory. So so we got all these. We got 153 studies, and the next page probably is a punchline. So I think I sent you 2 slides. Oh yeah, okay. Okay. So if you on the left side, you see observed. Schmidt Hunter said the observed validity is 25. My update, yep, I agree, it's 25. And then to the right of that is what happens with the 21st century data. No, the observed is down even lower than that. It's 16, which will gulp. And so then on the right side, we say, what happens if you do these range restriction corrections? And first you see the Schmidt-Hunter, which is where they wrongly applied the correction to the 80% concurrent studies that got 51. Next to that is, I say, if you use the 50-year-old data, but don't do the miscorrection, you get 31. And then on the gray to the right of that says 21st century data, it's even less than that. So we're now in the low 20s.
Why would that be? I mean, that doesn't really make sense to me.
There's 2 reasons. It doesn't make sense. And I went into this saying, I didn't know what we'd find. I mean, some people say, hey, jobs are getting more cognitively complex, the new information world. And if that's true, cognitivity becomes more important and we should see higher validity. And now, if you take a serious look and move out of psychology and look at economists who are looking at changes in the world of work, I mean, for every job that's being made more complex, another job is being made less complex,
You're
right?
taking away all
In
the
the old days,
complexity, yeah.
the world's simplest, the cashier who used to have to make change, and I have to know how to count out, how do I give somebody 83 cents? Now you press a button, then the 83 cents come down a tube. I mean, we've done a lot so it's a mix of up, down, and the same. So there doesn't seem to be per se a net change in the cognitive demands of jobs. But what's more telling is the big change in the world of work, and we all know, as we all say it, it's the top of all of our lists, is work used to be done largely individualized. It's now It's now
Yeah.
teamwork. So
Networked,
interpersonal
yeah.
skills and teamwork are important. So if I ask how are you doing? Tell me about your job performance. What the way we define job performance today is different than we did
Yeah.
50 years ago. It's so basically the performance, I say the pie has gotten larger. We've added this interpersonal and teamwork piece. And so cognitive ability, which still works to me the same way it used to, it'll predict your performance on the technical parts of the job just as well today as it did 50 years ago. Nothing's gone wrong with our tests. But because we've added all this other stuff, it's predicting a smaller piece of this bigger pie. Does that make sense?
Oh,
Yeah, well, can
absolutely.
I
So
can I
that's
repeat it back to you in a
sure,
way that
sure.
just makes sense to me, and you tell me if this is incorrect? It seems like over the last 50 years, we and I say like IO psychology and the methods that we use are actually having a much more difficult, not much more, but a more difficult time predicting at the levels we used to be able to predict. But it's not because our methods necessarily got worse. It's that the criterion measures of what it means to be good at your work have more variance within them, and probably the criterion problem is as great as it ever was.
Right.
And that could be the reason for why. Is that a fair assessment?
That's very fair. That's good. So it's just, yeah, there's more stuff that goes into job performance. There's more things that can make you a good performer, more things that can derail you, you know?
Are we still talking about like averaging over low and high skill jobs though? I mean,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
McDonald's cashier is far different than a
exactly.
VP at
Yeah.
some tech
And I
company.
have to say, in this work that we've just, I mean, it'll show up in JAP online next week or something like that. This
Probably by the time this episode is out, it may
Oh,
be
okay.
live.
In the past, people have found higher validity for more complex jobs and lower validity for less. So that's a standard finding. And I have to scratch my head and say, we don't get that in these 21st century data. I get for, the same level of validity for cognitively complex and less complex. So I don't know what to make of that. And there's a second reason why validity is lower. One, performance is broader with interpersonal and teamwork. And the second, and I find this one really interesting, applicant pools are narrowing.
What does that mean?
It means that the range of ability in the people who apply to a given job is narrower now than it used to be. People are
Interesting.
getting better at self-selecting into
So it's like
jobs
a
that make sense for
sociological
them.
phenomena that's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because if you think of, I mean, if validity, it's sort of range restriction, not imposed by the organization, but imposed by people have information. I mean, think back 50 years ago. I want a job. How do I find out about that job? Well, there's no easy way to find out, unless I talk to my buddy about the job he's got. And now, you know, you can go online and get all kinds of information. It's, yeah, this makes sense. I should apply for this one. No, this one doesn't make sense for me. I mean, we do all this. I mean, let's be simple. Let's look at our own profession. What does PSYOP do? PSYOP conveniently publishes a nice little table about every graduate program saying
Yeah.
this is the average level of grade and GRE. So there's information to people for them to say, oh my goodness, it looks like I'm in the range for these 10 schools, and it looks like maybe some of these are out of reach. And the usual language, I may take a shot at a couple, stretch schools. But yeah, so we have information, and it lets people self-select into what, things that they believe they've got a chance at succeeding at, or believe, that this is the kind of job that makes sense for me. So a narrowing of skill would result in a lowering of validity. Nothing wrong with the test, no change. It's just the question we're asking is, for candidates within this range, how well does it differentiate? The broader the range, the better it'll differentiate. The more self-selection, the less it'll differentiate.
Interesting. I'd heard research out there about, like the sorting in society that's going along socioeconomic status lines. Like,
Hmm.
people of high socioeconomic status are more likely to marry people of high socioeconomic status, and that's creating stratifications more and more in society. It's interesting that actually is impacting our selection techniques over in the IO psychology realm. That's
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
yeah, yeah. So So that's new. I wasn't aware of this stuff, and it's I'll give a shout out to the Minnesota grad, a fellow by the name of Piers Steele on the faculty at University of Calgary, who's been producing these interesting findings on the narrowing of ability. So it's interesting. Cool.
Y'all want to move on to the nerdery? Do a couple of articles real quick.
Sure.
I thought you had a cool new segment for us, Scott. I was excited.
You want to do the cool new segment?
I would rather do the cool new segment than the nerdery, to be honest with you.
Okay.
The Confusion Matrix.
Well, I don't know what your cool new segment is, so you're taking me by surprise here, but that's okay.
So, Paul, you're going to be the guinea pig here. Like this may fail wildly, but
Hey,
it may.
Don't embarrass me. I'm embarrassed myself. That's
So I found a website that had really just crazy research that's been published, and I was like, okay, we can make a game out of this. So I have one real study and two fake studies.
Oh, fun.
And both of your tasks are to identify the real study in this list, okay?
I like it.
Y'all ready for this? Is this the first time you've done this?
Yeah, never heard of this. This is great.
Okay, study one comes from the University of Idaho in the Journal of Experimental Physics. It's called Spuds in Space, an analysis of the aerodynamic properties of potatoes. Spuds in Space. Study two is from the University of Amsterdam Animal Behavior Journal. Feline frequencies, cats' responses to different musical genres. Okay, so cats' responses to different musical genres. In study three, Journal of Ergonomics from the University of Denmark, impact of wet underwear on thermoregulatory responses and thermal comfort in the cold. So the impact of wet underwear on thermoregulatory responses.
I have no idea.
So once again, potatoes, cats,
right?
or underwear.
They're all absurd, which are so absurd that means they must be real. You know,
you got to guess, Paul. You got to.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So one is real. Well, wet underwear's got to be the real one.
Okay, why do you think that?
It's just the oddest.
That's the oddest.
I'm just using the least plausible. Must be the real answer, right? Isn't that how you're supposed to guess on multiple choice quizzes? You know.
Would it change your opinion if I said that cats prefer classical music over rock?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's disappointing. I have two cats, and they are forced to listen to rock all the time. So,
what kind of rock are we talking about?
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't go into that.
It doesn't go into you.
What do you think?
I meant Paul's cats. What kind of rock are they having to listen to?
Oh gosh. No, I'm an indie rock guy.
Ooh.
I started life as a musician. I played in bands through college, and it's way before your time, but I had in the era I was PSYOP president in 1993 or something like that. And in that era, there was this notion you gave your presidential address, but there was supposed to be a 5-minute piece of it where you did something talking about your personal life to, I don't know,
appease the crowd.
Exactly. And so I decided that, well, hell, I need to write and perform a song for the occasion. So,
God.
I'm the only guy to sing his presidential address. I still remember. So this was fun. There was a fellow, Bill Macy, became the PSYOP president, but Bill was the PSYOP chair at the time. And the day I called up, I said, Bill, I need something for my presidential address. And he says, what is it? I said, I need a grand piano and a microphone. And he said, oh, okay. And I later said, you didn't bat an eye? And he said, well, I didn't want to pry. So anyway, So it
sounds like it was like Elton John's "Candle in the Wind" or something
like that. Very like that. Very like that. It's one of those where I'm sitting here saying, there's only two possibilities. This is going to be the most this is going to fall so flat, and it's going to be the stupidest thing I've ever done, or and I mean, this was the big standing ovation. It was fun.
Of course,
it was a big hit. So a lot of fun.
I will get to the actual reveal in a moment, but I will say my very first PSYOP, my very first session that I went to was an Ignite session. The very first presenter rapped her Ignite speech, and it's been downhill since then, right? Never seen that ever again.
Yeah.
Peaked early.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, Cole, what do you think?
I was going to go with number 2 just because I thought it was weird. I don't know. I don't have any reason why I chose it.
Okay, let's see. Here, I will present the actual one.
All right, hold on. Let me put it on the screen.
Oh, there you go. It is the
Hey,
underwear.
yes. Oh my.
So, yeah, this research, they took 8 male subjects wearing wet and dry underwear in controlled cold conditions. And apart from the obvious significant cooling effects of wet underwear on thermal regulatory responses and thermal comfort, they also discovered that the thickness of the underwear exerted a greater effects on these factors than the material used. So now you know.
Now I
I mean,
know.
I feel like YouTube has advertised this finding to me before now that you say it. Because you get all these commercials about breathable underwear, you know?
Oh my goodness.
well, I mean, you live in Minnesota. This could come in like really handy, right?
This is
It's
handy.
pretty
Absolutely.
cold.
Yeah, I mean, we've had snow already. We had snow for Halloween. This is
Oof,
terrible. We
that's
had a
rough.
huge hailstorm, and every house in my neighborhood needs a new roof. So insurance companies are taking a beating, and the last 3 days I'm feeling so badly. I've had this crew of guys up on my roof pounding away at 25-degree temperatures. I'm going, oh, this is when you rank order jobs, roofing in the cold is
Do you like
is
go
not high
outside
on
and
my
be
list.
like, hey, what's your interest in this? Like, did you take a cognitive ability test before you got up on that roof?
I don't think we screen. I think this. Are you willing to do this?
yeah,
Do you
that's the
have skills
threshold
I
we
don't
call
have?
what
I'm
we're
not a
talking about.
guy who likes walking up I don't have good balance on climbing a roof. I'm just
Yeah.
no. Somebody else can do that. Yeah.
What's a good indie band? Like, what would you recommend out there?
Oh, well, they're long gone, but okay. For the last 2 decades, Guided by Voices are at the top of my list. Number one, I think it's one of the best band names I've ever heard,
Oh
just in
yeah.
terms of cool names. Guided by Voices. Um, yeah, I like them.
Okay. Well, do you want to do an abbreviated nerdery, Scott?
Yeah, let's do a quick one.
The nerdery. Do you want the open science one first?
Yeah, I'll set this up.
Okay.
So this is a commentary by Paul Spector. You interact with Paul Spector?
Yeah, a good amount. He gets lots of my mail. I get lots of his.
Of course.
We're sort of people of the same vintage and people who just sort of get confused. Yeah, a pretty well-known guy named Paul with a last name that starts with S. So yeah.
He has a really good open source assessment thing on his webpage. So you can go find a variety of different like measures out there. But
Right.
his commentary is titled "Is Open Science Rewarding A While Hoping for B?" So they say that open science focuses on the individual and not the overall system, i.e., you got to pre-register your experiments and this sort of thing. But people are still pressured to publish in like A-list journals and get significant findings, not only significant findings, but make a novel contribution to the field. And because of this, like, of course, people are going to try to game the systems. And in a nutshell, he essentially says that to really get these results, you need to aim at the universities and the journal practices to actually rid the field of these sort of like fraudulent or risky sort of behaviors. Kind of an interesting perspective. Like overall, open science sounds like a good deal, but I think he's right. You're not getting at the root cause of what's going on here.
Yeah, this was in the PSYOP journal, right? So this was he was responding to the Rick Guzzo, Ben Schneider piece. So that whole set of exchanges is very interesting. It's all very good and thoughtful work. I mean, the open science stuff I think is interesting and a really good thing. It's really changing what I do, and I'm sort of slow to adopt. I won't call myself a leader in it, but this notion of I'm finally getting around to, oh my goodness, this idea of pre-registering. So these days with my students, okay, we announce in advance every variable we're going to use, every analysis we're going to do, and that sort of keeps you on the straight and narrow. And I think for people who are well intended, it's a good thing. It takes away the temptation. Oh, I didn't get what I wanted. I'll pretend that wasn't the dependent variable I wanted, and I'll
Yeah.
switch my focus to something else. You can, yeah. I mean, this doesn't keep you from doing it, but at least you have to say, I acknowledge that I didn't get what I intended. This is exploratory in a new direction. And I'm fine with exploratory stuff, and my complaint is that it's also well the earlier paper, the Guzzo and Schneider talks about this pressure that everything's got to be theory driven rather than, oh my goodness, what on earth is wrong with saying I have a big interesting data set from a really interesting setting, and as I explore it, here's some phenomena that seem really interesting. Let's talk about them, and hopefully others pick up on that. So I'm fed up with this theory must come first model. But so yeah, so the open science stuff is great. It makes you be thoughtful about what you want to do, what matters. Helps you
Mhm.
avoid just after the fact finding something going wrong. Now, of course, and so that's good. But the question is this going to be a mechanism that's going to eliminate outright fraud? And I mean, it's real easy to just say, okay, if I truly am, I mean, you've got these handful of well-known cases of people whose entire career is, every study is made up data and all that kind of stuff. So if you're really bent on engaging in fraud, this
Yeah.
it's just one more hurdle you got to jump over. You collect your data, you look at it, you know all the answers, and then you submit and you pretend. I announce that I'm pre-registering something that I'm now about to collect, but you've already collected it. I mean, so I think there's, you could somebody who's hell bent on it can beat it. So this isn't gonna,
You could fabricate a data set and then pre-register
Yeah.
it, essentially.
right,
Especially if you're using ChatGPT.
yeah,
But
and of course that's changing everything. We've got. You may have seen this. Get an ad from somebody who says, "Hey, you know, um, here we've got this nice service. You're under pressure to produce some research since you're an academic setting, but we'll do it for you. Just
yeah.
give us a
Really?
one-liner, and we'll write you an intro section and a lit review for this much money. Give us a data set, and boom, we'll push the button, and we'll give you a results section. Boom, we'll give you a discussion section. Your study's done in a day. And I don't know how we're going to detect. How would we know if this is real or if this isn't? How would I know that somebody's data set?
I think it goes back to something you were saying, Paul, and I wanted to reinforce the point about starting with theory and then looking for data. I mean, I think there's a lot of goodness in that, but a lot of the theories that I've come up with myself in my career just came from situations where I had a lot of data at my disposal. I was able to search through it using kind of inductive reasoning methods and coming up with, oh my goodness, this isn't what I would have suspected. And then leading that led to me thinking of like new theories of how to approach the world or what some of these emergent properties. And I think that is actually going to be one of the ways that you check for faulty research in the future is, are you finding things that are consistent with in the data with other things that you would have found otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
comparing it against what you know because you have the real data, getting completely new sets of data, and you could be able to look at it and just be like, this looks funny. This can't be right. Right. And I think that's going to have to be one of the practical ways of checking for the work in the future.
Or it's just the need for replication, right? We don't do enough of that.
But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I learned so much from I just stumble into something, not I start with a theory. The one thing that I'm sort of known for is a program of work on distinguishing between typical and maximum performance. I don't know if that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we cited that before on the pod.
Okay, but I mean, so where does that come from? It was a pure consulting project. I'm working in the supermarket industry with the national trade organization, the Food Marketing Institute, who said, "Hey, we want a selection battery to predict who's going to be speed and accuracy and doing checkout work." And I'm working with a couple other people, Shelley Zedek at Berkeley and his former student Larry Fogley. So we're doing all this stuff, and the criterion was. Well, we ended up saying, "Oh my goodness, this was in the era where some stores were scanners were new. Lots of supermarkets were still an old cash register. You're punching in each one. So some are punching in old cash registers. Some have scanners, and we were trying to figure out, well, what's a way of, getting a measure that can be used commonly, and we realized, oh, with the scanner, you can get what now we call long-term typical performance. People don't even know, but it's recording, the
Yeah.
speed with which you scan every item you scan day in, day out for months. And for places that didn't have that, to get a speed measure, we created 6 baskets full of groceries where we knew what was in them and how much that should add up to. And we sat there with a stopwatch and timed them, and how fast can you do it and get it right. And so the sitting there, how well you do it for a limited period of time, you're being paid overtime to stay late and do this little research task. And so we didn't start with the theory, but it emerged. Oh my goodness, look, these things that we're getting in the study are one that we could think of, and we made up the name. We called it maximum performance, and the other one we made up the name and called it typical performance. And it's been cited a billion times, and there's a whole literature on this. And it just emerged out of, oh look, so for comparison, when we said let's give our 6 shopping carts also to all the people who have the scanners, so we can see how it compares. And boom, we've got
Yeah.
what turned
And for
into a whole
that,
lot of work.
for
But it's
that, we are
applied work.
forever grateful, Paul, because I think we've cited that a few times.
Okay.
Scott, I know you were trying to make a segue with the replication thing. Do you want to go that direction?
I really wasn't, because I love this idea that we test a lot, even like forget like supermarket workers. Like you put people through employment tests, this sort of thing, and you're really measuring their peak performance or like their ceiling, right? And then you hire them and get them on the job, and perhaps they have
Yeah.
no motivation, whatever.
It's fun. I mean, I talk about this a lot, and when you explain this, and then you say, now you have a choice. You can design a selection system to predict typical performance, or you can design one to predict maximum performance. Which one do you want? And then
Yeah,
people sitting there thinking a while, and it really depends. I mean, there
yeah.
are
There's
organizations
different
out there that
situations, but
say,
it would matter.
yeah, we make no attempt to influence what people do, so let's just hire people who we think their typical performance would be pretty good. And others, the U.S. military is a great example. They formally say we're trying to select for maximum performance because we believe we can put into place systems, motivation, supervision, culture, that will have people performing close to that max most of the time. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but they believe it. But it's a very conscious thing that, no, we're designing our selection systems to predict maximum, where most people are designing it to predict typical.
Well, they may want to try to replicate that. Story 2, here we go. The Journal of Consumer Research, Consumer Behavior's top research journal, now stands at 3.4% replication rate. So 29 replications have been attempted and only one has succeeded. So
That's pretty bad.
that ain't good.
Way worse than what Corday mentioned. Way
Yeah.
worse. It's so bad.
Well, I mean, a couple different things here. Like, we don't know what these studies are, and it is consumer behavior, not say IO sort of work psych sort of stuff. So there may be some natural variability in here, but not what you want to build theory or anything really.
No, not at all. Now, the good news to me is there's stuff like this, where people are looking at the quote management literature and viewing IO as a subset, and sort of trying to get replication rates there, and reporting things that look a lot better. If you do if you combine percent complete replication and percent partial, because you often you're testing many hypotheses.
Right.
I've seen one recently that puts our replication rate around 75%, which is wildly different from 3.4. And you start to ask, well, what do we do better? Why are we more successful than others? And to me, the simplest thing is, IO discovered long before most other fields that you're doomed to failure if you do quote small sample research. This notion that I was taught it in grad school.
Yeah.
If 30 people is perfectly fine for a study. And the IO people caught on, and here, give Schmidt and Hunter a lot of credit. They're the people who published some stuff early on how the role of so it's now second nature to us. We worry about sampling error, and somebody has tallied this. Um, the average sample size for a published article in Journal of Applied Psychology by decade, from when it was founded in 1900 something till now, and it's up dramatically. I mean, it used to be, yeah, we're running the ends of 30, 40, 50, and now the average is in the several hundreds. We just sort of realized you're going to fool yourself easily with small samples, and we are better at avoiding that than other fields. So that's one big piece.
You perform meta-analyses, obviously. Like, what does that mean? Like a 75-80% replication rate mean for including those studies into meta-analyses
Yeah, yeah.
and
Well,
deriving results,
now
etc.
meta-analysis is how you solve this whole problem. You can only do meta-analysis if you've got a research question,
Hmm.
relationship between something and something else, that enough people study that you've got a whole bunch of them, right? I mean, the reason for all this replication price crisis is there's so many one-off things. Somebody that says, hey, I've got a study on something nobody's ever done before, and here it is. Um, so how do you solve that problem? Well, if 40 or 50 people study it and each produce a value, and we toss them all into the meta-analysis, and meta-analysis has got all the bells and whistles in it that says how much variability would you expect just due to fluctuations in sample size. So we just pull out that, due to sampling error is our term.
Yeah.
We expect that, and it gets us there. So a meta-analytic world is our best bet at solving this. It's almost like you might say, until something's got enough literature that we got a meta-analysis, call it preliminary.
I just want to get your perspective on something. I don't know if this is necessarily contrary to what you're saying, but one of the things that I think is an untapped aspect of our field is like there'll be I mean, let's just focus on like assessments for a second. There'll be companies out there that sometimes have millions, if not hundreds of millions, of samples of using their assessments for different things, and those sample sizes are so much more tremendous than a meta-analysis. Um, are we missing something by not including that type of work in what we do? Because I mean, we've had some scientists come on the podcast before, and they talk about like how people that are like out in the real world aren't doing the best science. I'm like, look at their sample sizes alone. That's something like the magnitude of that is something to behold. And I mean, are we missing something there?
Yeah, I mean, this is something the IO field has wrung its hand and agonized. I mean, there's all these settings where wonderful, really large scale data is collected. And the question is, it's not exploited to the as well as it could be for the benefit of the field. One, what if somebody says it's proprietary, nobody else can see it? Well, of course, that doesn't go into the meta-analysis under those circumstances. Second, no, I'm out there doing all this work, but I don't have the time to write it up in a way and describe it and put it in either a formal journal or even write it up as a blog post. I mean, so there's so much good info out there that there's all this talk. How do we find mechanisms to can we pair up people out there with access to data but no time to do stuff with it
Yeah.
with other folks who say, yeah, I mean, I'm in a job where I've got plenty of research projects. I'm not shopping for them myself right now, but I mean, but conceptually, where somebody says, yeah, sure, I'll, let's try to do something together and for the benefit of what we know collectively as a field. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lots of, the single study that's bigger than, you know, my 21st century cognitivity meta-analysis is 153 studies totaling 40,000 people. That's good, but
Yeah.
so here's somebody running a single large selection system where they're screening 100,000 people a year, and you go, well, wow, if
Yeah, I remember seeing a conference presentation from I won't say the company, but I mean it's a very very large organization, and they said that using their assessment strategy, and again, this wasn't a vendor selling something. This was just an internal practitioner. They said they could select down to the day using the assessment results how soon when someone would quit the organization, down to the day, because they had such large sample size over a long enough period of time, I'm like, I don't see any of our science being at that level of sophistication. So I feel like that there is such a need for these type of partnerships to occur,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's got to require incentives for both sides to want to align, and I just
Right.
don't see those incentives aligned. And so I try to talk about this stuff to say maybe we can start aligning these incentives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. I'm on board with all that.
Well,
Mic drop. Nice.
and we're done.
We're done.
Well, do you mind if I give a quick plug for something really quick? Just because I think it's related to what we've been talking about today. And I think he's a friend of yours, Paul. But I mentioned it a few weeks ago with Jackson Roach that Fred Oswald has a new Substack that's come out, and he's written a series on the Schmidt and Hunter article. This is part 1, but his Substack's called Working Things Out. So I wanted to give him a plug here because he goes into very sophisticated detail on a lot of the math behind this, that I think if somebody is wanting to dig further into our discussion today and you want to know more about the math, I would say check this out. But I think Fred's doing amazing work. But it's been amazing having you on today, Paul. I've been looking forward to this ever since I saw your research come out, and then the IOP commentary that came out afterwards, and then your presentation of the SciAp LEC. So I'm just glad that we got to have this discussion today. Scott, any parting words for Paul before we let you go?
You're the man, the myth, the legend. How messy is your car? I think we need to know this, right?
Hey. As clean as can be, for whatever it's worth. I'm a clean car guy. Yeah.
And tip to everybody out there.
One. So yeah. Who knows? And I will also endorse, Fred Oswald is a Minnesota grad. He worked with me when he was a grad student. Does amazing work. He and I have been arguing about the stuff in that blog. So we've been going back and forth on about his math, but it's fun to see Fred doing that.
We'll have a debate. Let's do it.
Guy and doing very, very, very interesting things. So
sorry, I didn't realize. Well, I mean, with how clean your car is, Paul, you definitely are going to be exhibiting some maximal performance. So we appreciate you joining us today. But you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Paul Sackett. Thank you, Paul.
Great. Thank you.
All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott.